Well, I accepted the invitation to come here, and then I was absolutely horrified, not so much at speaking to high school kids, but because I'm a philosopher, and I was told that I'd only got 4 minutes to talk. I can't even get to the main verb in a sentence in 4 minutes. So let me just make 2 or 3, as it were, PowerPoint points. The first is that I'm an ardent evolutionist. I'm an ardent Darwinian. I think that Darwinian theory is a terrific theory. It's an absolutely smashing theory. It really thrills me to hear the kind of talks that you've had this morning. It seems to me that this is really life and being a human and being an intellectual and everything right at the cutting edge. I'm an ardent Darwinian. Second, I was brought up as a Christian. I was brought up as a Quaker. But I'm no longer a Quaker. I'm no longer a Christian. I prefer to think of myself as an agnostic rather than an atheist, but I guess if you were to push me, I'm pretty atheistic on most things. So you know where I'm coming from. Having said that, I simply have to endorse what Father Weissman said, is I can't for the life of me see why one can't be both an ardent Darwinian and whether one can be a non-believer like myself or a believer like Father Weissman. It seems to me that these are 2 separate things. Obviously, one cannot be a fundamentalist, a biblical literalist. However, one of the things I'm sure will come out in discussion, this is certainly not traditional Christianity. If one goes back to the fathers of the church, particularly St. Augustine, 400 AD, St. Augustine was very clear that you don't have to read the Bible literally, and frankly, friends, often you should not. The Bible is not a work of science. It's as has been said many times, it tells us where we're going to rather than where we came from. So I do want to say that I see these as 2 separate issues. Having said that, I think that there are issues of considerable philosophical and historical interest. I don't think one can just simply, as it were, pack up now and go home. I think that there are some of the issues I think that one has to work with are issues like the problem of pain and evil and suffering. If natural selection is true, then an awful lot of animals are dying in a great deal of pain. Is this God's way? Did God allow it? Did God permit it? Did God not have any choice about this? There are all sorts of solutions, but I think that these are things with which one has to wrestle. Secondly, and Father Weissman already has pinpointed this, if evolution is a random process, then what about humans? Are we, as Stephen Jay Gould used to say, just the effects of our lucky stars? If that meteor had not hit the Earth, 65 million years ago, would humans not be around? I think that there are answers, but I think that these are issues which need to be discussed. Third, if in fact evolution is true, does this mean, in Richard Dawkins' memorable phrase, we're all selfish genes? What about morality? Is morality something just for the weak members of society, and should the strong person, as it were, be the Nietzschean Superman, or woman in this day and age, and just go out and do what they want and ignore morality? I don't think so, but I think, again, these are issues which need discussing. And the final one that I'm going to leave you with is, why is this such a big debate in America? As you can tell from my accent, I was born in England. I lived most of my life in Canada. And frankly, this science-religion debate in this sort of way is not an issue. I mean, in Canada, for instance, we have state-supported Catholic schools, and yet the whole question of biblical literalism is not a big issue. Why is it an issue in America? And I hope that some of these topics will come up in our discussion today.
Okay, so I think my outlook on this is shaped by certainly the working scientist perspective. And you can imagine that the pitch that this discussion of evolution has reached in our culture has been disconcerting to the scientific community. And it's certainly disconcerting in light of what we think is overwhelming evidence, fascinating evidence, inspiring, beautiful, majestic evidence in support of the evolutionary process. And so my comments, or at least the topics that I sort of feel I want to lob out to you a little bit, is the coverage of this issue in the media. Obviously, the media is the place where a lot of people get their information, the television and newspapers. And I think I'm going to just probably kick off some questions or some comments from the audience by just asking, for example, how many of you have seen in a newspaper or on television the perspective given by Father Wiseman? How many of you think you should hear more from people like Father Wiseman? Okay, that confirms my first suspicion. This issue has been so polarized, in my opinion. It's been polarized by the representation of extremism on one part, religious extremism, religious fundamentalism, and on the other part by hapless scientists sitting there trying to compress 200 years of science into 6 minutes of sound bites. And it looks like in the sort of philosophy of the media to give equal time that two positions, pro-evolution and denial of evolution, are represented. But those two individuals, of course, don't represent the equal weight of evidence. That scientist would have tens of thousands of scientists sitting behind him or her, and that individual, while he may have a very large religious flock, any claims that the scientific community is in any doubt about the validity of evolutionary theory is a gross distortion of the reality. And I think the media has failed miserably in doing their own investigations to understand the strength of evidence and the weight, the force of thinking behind the evolutionary position. So I'm most concerned from your viewpoint because you are, especially your generation, is surrounded by 24-hour news channels. This is very different than the environment we grew up in, where it was a one half-hour news broadcast on 2 or 3 channels an evening. A lot more people read newspapers 25 years ago than read them now. And so you get this constant barrage of presentation of controversy, of conflict, of polarized viewpoints, whether they're about this issue or whether they're about other political issues. And that I think that's resulted in a gross distortion that, in part, one of the reasons for the holiday lectures is to try to bring at least the grounding back to what the scientific evidence says. What does the scientific process tell us about the reality of evolution? So my general comments are going to be, or my questions I'm going to try to lob out, have to do with the way you've been presented issues, the way you've been presented the balance or imbalance between issues, and some of your perceptions about what people think. So the first question I want to put to you, again, I don't mean to pick on Father Wiseman, not at all. In fact, maybe should I explain a little bit about my background? I went to a Catholic high school. I learned evolution from an ordained priest. I best understand the Roman Catholic position because that was the environment I was brought up in. So I'm taking advantage of that, a little bit of that understanding to say, how many of you that belong to different denominations than Roman Catholic, raised in a different denomination, find what Father Wiseman said surprising? And would any of you care to share why you find it surprising? Right there on the bench, yeah.
I think it's surprising because from the way I was brought up, I think I was taught to take the Bible a lot more literally, maybe not verbatim, but a lot more literally than what Father Wiseman was saying.
Sure, right here.
I want to ask you what you think is the main